Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Don't really like to start with apologies, but I think I do want to apologize for the late start. We've had some technological issues right up front. Also, working with this new tool that we have, things were slightly different this morning. So I'm really sorry that we're only starting now. We will obviously try and catch up and still do whatever we need to do within the time frame as per the program. So a very, very big welcome to all of you. I know that it isn't easy at this time of the year to craft up this many hours in your day to listen to a presentation, but this is a very important presentation as it impacts the sector in a very, very big way, especially if we don't do what we need to do. So welcome to the first NPO working group public meeting. And the topic of the discussions today is about navigating challenges related to money laundering and terrorist financing regulations. And so some of you may know something about it and others may not. We do intend today to bring you up to speed. And obviously, if there is more information required, we'll direct you where you can find it. And then there is also the members of the NPO working group who will be available to talk to some of you, whoever needs more info. So what is the program for today? So we're supposed to have started 15 minutes ago, and today I'm going to do the welcome and introductions to the different speakers of the morning. And then we will, our very first presenter. So first of all, I should actually say who I am. I'm sorry. My name is Theriel Domingo. I'm the Acting Executive Director of INYATELO, the South African Institute for Advancement. We are a member of the NPO working group. And other members of the NPO working group will be introduced in a presentation given by Jenny later on in the morning. But I wanted just to talk to you quickly about who is going to be presenting today. So Anne Bown is a semi-retired sustainability consultant in the non-profit sector. She has over 30 years of experience in good governance, marketing, fundraising, and strategic planning. Anne has worked with major international organizations in Africa and Europe, as well as assisting local community-based organizations. Anne is a past president of the Southern Africa Institute of Fundraising, as we know it as SAIF, and she is a SAIF fellow. She formerly served as a member of the NPO arbitration panel and the DSD ministerial task force. So there's a lot of experience there. Since 2021, she's been a volunteer of the NPO working group. We're delighted to have Anne with a wealth of knowledge. And she's currently a board member of the Whale Coast Conservation Foundation and consults to the JB Marks Education Bursary Fund and the Mine Workers Investment Trust. So that will be our second presenter. And then we have Anthony Masaki, I hope I pronounced that correctly, all the way from Uganda. We're very privileged to have Anthony here with us. He is a human rights advocate with over a decade of experience in working with most at-risk human rights defenders and marginalized communities. He is a 2023 fellow of the Fisher Family Summer Fellows Program at the Center on Democracy, Development and the Rule of Law, Stanford University. Before joining Chapter 4, where he is currently, Masaki worked with the Legal Aid Project of the Uganda Law Society for over 7 years, during which he facilitated over 400 sensitizations in outreach activities in prisons and communities. His service was recognized by a certificate of merit from the president of the Law Society. So the next speaker will be Glenn Farrett. He is a civil society activist with years of experience working in the sector and currently works as a consultant. He was also the previous executive director of SADC, CNGO, and therefore has a wealth of experience working in civil society in the region. He's been a volunteer of the NPO working group since its inception in 2021, and has been a key advocate and thought leader at various engagements for the NPO working group. And then we have Jenny, and I am missing Jenny's bio. I'm really, really sorry. Um, Jenny Suzanne, can you please read out Jenny's bio as I'm missing it in the pack?
Hi, Farrell. Just give me a second quickly.
Thank you. I'm so sorry about that.
Sorry, Farrell. Sorry, Jenny. Can we go ahead?
Sure, go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
yeah, I can't find it at the moment.
So, So Jenny Wright is the executive director of a nonprofit called Milk Matters, and she has been a very key member of the nonprofit work NPO working group. She's been really a rock star in terms of just bringing her weight into the different issues that we're grappling with all the time. And Jenny is going to present to you later about next steps and how to engage all of you, and also give you a little bit of the history and timeline of the kind of things that we've been doing. So thanks for that. Welcome all of you again. We will now proceed to the next. I did talk to you about the program. So this is what we're going to be covering, presentations. Then we will break at a reasonable time, because now we're a little bit behind, for Q&A. And then we will talk to, Jenny will talk to a call to action for the nonprofit sector. And then we will close and hopefully be done by 12 o'clock. Okay, so what we did leading up to this workshop or webinar, and in your registration, you had to answer a couple of questions which we thought was very important, so that we are very clear on how we position our information sharing sessions, and also have a very clear and good understanding of the constituents that we are serving in terms of their knowledge, and information that they hold, to be able to take it into their organizations and the areas and umbrella bodies, and that they work with and they support. So this pre-registration survey, I'm just going to share the results with you. The first question was, do you have any knowledge of the impact that the misinterpretation and misapplication of FATF recommendations has had on civic space? When Anne makes a presentation, she's going to go into a bit more detail about FATF, what it is, all that sort of thing. But for some of you who have been kind enough to respond to the questions, you can see there the blue 49%, I have limited understanding. That is a very worrying situation for us, which is why the NPO working group is putting all the effort in to make sure that we have sessions like this. We put stuff out on social media. We populate the NPO working group website with information so that we can be up to speed, and know what we need to do in the different spheres where we work. So the green there, I have no knowledge on the topic. And then there's a little bit, I'm an expert. So there's a 1% of experts of those who responded. I'm very happy with that. And so we'll be tapping into those experts to see how they can help us disseminate the information. And then a blue 22%, I'm aware, but I need more clarity. So you can see for yourself, there's really a need for us to do this. The second question was, are you aware of any changes in legislation impacting the South African nonprofit sector? And that's very clear. The bigger percentage says they are aware of it, so that's not a bad thing. If they're aware, do they need to know? How do they prepare? That's the other big question. So awareness is one thing, right? The other question, has your organization faced any challenges or obstacles related to the new regulations? I'm not aware of it. Is a big 52%. So they're not aware that they're not aware of the challenges, or are they aware, not aware that they haven't dealt with it sufficiently to have been able to identify obstacles and challenges, is what we would like to unpack a little bit further at some point. And then definitely not your organization hasn't faced any challenges, 40%. And that again is, I'd like to understand, is it because you haven't dealt with it, or do you just not have because you've dealt with it, or you've dealt with it adequately, and so therefore there is no challenges? We're sufficiently equipped to be able to deal with the issues that we're talking about today. And then 8% says yes, right? So interesting. And so if yes, what were they and how did you manage the requirements? If no or not aware, type non-applicable. So, so this is what we got. There's some comments here that says uncertainty regarding lodging returns to Sub-C on beneficial ownership for NPOs. That's a big topic. Beneficial ownership. I think there's a lot for us to understand about beneficial ownership, and we'll unpack that later on. And some have said I've had reports of challenges from affiliated members, and that it is more onerous reporting. They've experienced more onerous reporting. I think some of us can attest to that, of course. And then mainly around new reporting obligation on trustees in terms of beneficial ownership. So most organizations responded not aware of challenges or obstacles, but those that who did not respond obviously mentioned these as I've just read out to you. So the next question was, would you be interested in collaborating with the NPO working group? And so I understand the no is because everyone is so busy. I'm assuming that is why. And so overwhelmingly the 78% have said yes, which is, we will be unpacking that later on during Jenny's presentation. It is certainly very encouraging, and it does sort of show not only that participants recognize the value in the work of the NPO working group, but also and they see alignment with the goals and the sense that there's shared value between what they're grappling with and what we're bringing to the table. So I'm very thankful for that overwhelming yes. We will engage with you, of course, as we go along. So if you can please, any questions or comments that you have, you can post it in the chat. If there's a very, very niggling question, we will deal with it immediately after the presentation. However, there is a Q&A session more towards the end, and we would like to deal with it there. And then also to say that this is a recording, so we're recording the discussion this morning. And as we normally do, post the sessions, we will share the information, we'll share the recording, we'll guide you to the website for more information, all right? So you'll get the presentation, you'll get everything post the sessions today. So I am now going to hand over to Anne Bown to do her piece. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. How lovely to see you. Who's driving the slides? Farrell, are you doing it? Okay, off you go then.
Yes.
Okay, so what we're going to cover here is what is FATF. I'm certainly no expert, but I've actually had a crash course. So I'm sharing with you all my new knowledge about FATF. Then we'll talk a little bit about what is AML and CFT. You'll get used to all these acronyms. What is grey listing? What is the impact? What is recommendation 8 or R8? And where to next? Where else is FATF going to take us? So there we go. So this is quite interesting. This quote from Tom Keating from the Royal United Services Institute. He says, FATF is one of the most powerful organizations in the world that you've never heard of. And isn't that just so? When the NPO amendment bill came out, there was a clause in there requiring that all foreign organizations had to, it was compulsory registration. And then we asked, where's this coming from? And we were told it's from FATF. And we said, who's FATF? So anyway, if you don't know who FATF is, that's where we all were 2 years ago. So we're all on a fast track learning here. Okay. So who and what is FATF? It's a global money laundering terrorist financing watchdog. It sets global standards and publishes best practices and guidance to prevent illicit flows. It assesses, it evaluates countries on their practices and how are they going to improve and prevent money laundering terrorist financing. They also train officials in anti-money laundering and terrorist financing techniques. So this is a huge organization. It started over 34 years ago. It was an idea that came out of one of the G7 meetings to fight financial crime and the drug trade. Then after 9/11 in 2001, terrorist financing was added. Over 200 governments are involved in FATF and are implementing the global standards. So we're not alone, we're not unique. They're based in Paris with a membership of 39 countries, 20 observers, and as you heard me say, over 200 jurisdictions. Their partners include what they call regional AML bodies, and then United Nations, the Edgemont Group on Financial Intelligence, the IMF, World Bank, and others. South Africa is the only African member. Other countries participate through the regional bodies that I just referred to. So there are 9 FATF regional bodies. South Africa is a member of the Eastern and Southern Africa AML group. And the very first Africa of this particular regional body meeting was held in Cape Town in May. I won't go into the details of that because it probably will come up in the conversation. FATF issue 40 recommendations, not rules, not regulations, but recommendations and standards for countries to adopt or adapt. And some countries have misapplied and misused these recommendations, leading to what is now termed unintended consequences of FATF, particularly in the nonprofit sector. So there's been quite a tussle going on for a few years for our sector. So this is a map of the regional bodies around the world. As you can see, it's very extensive and very involved. And when you're involved in these FATF meetings, it's just wonderful to hear all these different voices from around the world on different time zones. And some are going to bed and some are waking up. But it really is wonderful to hear the collaborations that are happening. Next slide. And here we have the particular Eastern and Southern Africa AML group that we're a part of. And on that map, you can see one of the most beautiful countries on the continent, Uganda, of which Anthony will be talking about their experience a bit later. But it really is amazing network that we have on the continent now, and we need to expand on that. So anti-money laundering, let's assume we all know, but let's assume we don't know. But FATF continuously monitors how criminals and terrorists raise, use, and move the funds around. They also keep up with the financial flows from different countries, illicit financial flows, and how money laundering happens in different countries. It's quite interesting when you're part of some of these discussions that they're having and some of the schemes that are going on. They regularly publish reports and they create awareness all the time. But like we said earlier, who's heard of FATF? So what is grey listing? You would have all heard about grey listing last year and wondered where does this lead to now. It's what they call a jurisdiction under increased monitoring, or a high-risk jurisdiction. We are grey listed. We're not blacklisted. I don't think we'll ever be blacklisted. And some feel that it was unfair to grey list us because we were putting things right. In 2019, a mutual evaluation report was conducted, instructing the country to go, or advising the country to make some changes, and to remedy 20 recommendations. So in February 2023, because we were a bit slow, we didn't move fast enough, we were added to the FATF grey list. However, last year, November, progress had been made with us being technically compliant. So we've got 5 recommendations that are rated compliant, 29 rated largely compliant, and 5 remain partially compliant. 1 we discovered was not applicable to our country. The 5 remain partially compliant includes the NPO grouping. So being on the grey list has significant and negative consequences, economically, the investment, and possibly can affect international aid. This is of grave concern to us. However, the impact of grey listing only eventuates after 18 to 24 months. This was research that was done by the University of Melbourne, their economics division, and they've done a lot of sampling around the world of grey listed countries. And in the beginning, everyone says, what was that grey listing all about? Nothing's happened, nothing's changed. And then boom, boom, 2 years later, suddenly you wake up to things are not good. So fixing the shortcomings requires an action plan by each country and reform. And the South African government believes this is an opportunity to tighten up controls, not only in the non-profit sector, but in all aspects in the country. One of the things I learned about was the Fusion Centre. I didn't know about this. I don't know if many of you know about it. It was established to bring together the NPA and the state security and the tax and the investigation unit, the Hawks, crime intelligence, and the Financial Intelligence Centre to combat all this. So we are taking this work very seriously. However, our minister is very optimistic, our Minister of Finance, and he reckons we'll be off the grey list this time next year. So that is good news. So FATF standards and recommendations for NPOs and the unintended consequences. We comply with recommendation 1, number 8, number 24 and 25. These apply to non-profits and the immediate outcome. So recommendation 8 is the best practice paper on combating terrorist financing abuse. And you can have a look at that paper afterwards. This requires countries to undertake a domestic review of their NPO sector, registered and unregistered. I thought that was very important, the unregistered. And to have the capacity to obtain timely information on its activities, size, and other relevant features, and review the adequacy of laws. The regulations that relate to the portion of the NPO sector that can be abused for money laundering is actually quite small, but we all have to comply with what's going on here. The NPO sector was labelled in 2015 as being particularly vulnerable by FATF. It's now just vulnerable. I don't quite know the difference, but anyway, apparently that's where we're at the moment. So what is grey listing? Oh, sorry. NPOs which fall within the FATF definition are a legal personal arrangement or organization that primarily engages in raising or dispersing funds for purposes such as charitable, religious, cultural, educational, social, fraternal, or for the carrying out of other good types. I don't know about you, but I don't see that as being a unique definition that seems to include everyone. But anyway, that's how they define it. So what are the unintended consequences of overregulation? I've listed quite a few things here. that you can actually read when you've got more time. But it's the restrictions on the organizations. It's how we could be limited in what we're doing. It could mean that some organizations will shut down, particularly, and you'll hear more from Anthony on this, the human rights organization and the environmental activists often get caught up in terms of non-compliance and almost bordering on to involved with terrorism. We could be forced to redirect our funds from our mission to combat government allegations. In other words, taking government to court if they deregister you. It could be reputational damage to non-profits and civil society as a whole. The chilling effect on freedom of association is quite horrific. And the Zimbabwe case is one. And I'm sure Anthony will share his insights as well. And then there's an inability to apply for grants because we're being non-compliant, and also the chilling effects on humanitarian aid. PEPFAR funding, for instance, could be one that further down the line could start diminishing. So these are some of the unintended consequences. Next slide, Phil. Right. Then we have the overregulation and the possibility of de-risking by the banks. Now, I think we've got a couple of people from the banks on board here. And what has happened in other countries, the banks have taken the regulations and played policemen and taken this to the nth degree and have frozen bank accounts, increased due diligence, termination and closing a bank account. So don't just freeze it, they close it and give you like 2 days notice, 24 hours notice. Then the delaying or blocking of transfer of funding coming in from another country or going out, then refusing to open a bank account and refusing to give you an explanation. So these are some of the unintended consequences of the well-meaning recommendation 8 from FATF. So what's next on the FATF agenda? Well, the good news is that recommendation 8 has recently been revised by our partners, the Global NPO Coalition, the International Centre for Nonprofit Law, the European Centre for NPO Law. FATF actually have an NPO work stream in FATF staff that work alongside the Greenacre Group, which South Africa is working closely with, the regional group, and the Human Security Collective. They've just issued the most amazing report that I can share with you later. As you heard me talk about the University of Melbourne, the economics department, and the UN Special Rapporteur on the protection of human rights and the freedom of association, because this has now become quite a big challenge for the nonprofit sector. Next slide. So where to next with FATF? Currently, South Africa's undergoing an at-risk analysis of nonprofits. Then you heard earlier about the beneficial ownership, and Anthony will touch on that as well. Then the banking and finance sector. How do we as a nonprofit sector meet up with the banking and finance sector so that we don't sort of talk past one another and that we can actually have some form of partnership on how this is impacting? Because the last thing we want is for the banks to become awkward, difficult, and start closing our nonprofits down. It will be a disaster. And then there's the cyber currency, the cryptocurrency and ransomware that FATF's looking at that could impact. And more recently, there was an online webinar last week on crowdfunding, how terrorists are using platforms to raise funds under the guise of being a nonprofit organization, and even stealing profiles of legitimate nonprofit organizations. They're getting hold of their constitutions, their banking details, and they're mimicking who they are online. So there's a lot coming. Environmental crime is also being linked to some of the nonprofits as well. Human trafficking. Some organize. I know of a situation that I'm not going to share with you. I thought this wasn't possible, but it does happen. for medical use. There's been some human trafficking going on in South Africa. So where to next with FATF? There's a lot of things in the pipeline. Here's some useful links for you to look at later. And
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Anne. I mean, as you can all hear, there's a lot. There is a lot to understand, and certainly these links, it requires a bit of time for you to read, but it really is important that we all get into that space and really familiarize ourselves a little bit more. It's a lot. I mean, it's a global issue, right? And so, you know, just trying to understand what different people are doing in different parts of the world around this issue is also very helpful. So thank you very much, Anne. I'm now going to move on to um, allow the next presentation from, so Anne was going to just mention the Zimbabwe case, but I'm going to just skip that for now and we'll get it in the presentation and move on to Anthony Masaki. Anthony, over to you. Anthony's got his own presentation, which Suzanne will share.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me today. It's a pleasure. Greetings from Kampala. The weather is very beautiful here. I hope the same is true in South Africa as well. So my name is Anthony Masake once again. I'm the head or rather the director of programs at Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is a civil liberties organization that does a lot of work on the freedom of association, and of course, by extension, the right of access to resources of the NPOs. We also do a lot of work on the freedom of expression, the freedom of peaceful assembly, and other civil and political rights broadly. So I will dive in again in the interest of time, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to chip in just to clarify. So I will start, of course, with the legal framework on AML and TF. And Anne, thank you so much for that very elaborate presentation. So we can start using the AML and TF acronyms as we go ahead, I guess. So in terms of the legal framework, there are three major laws that govern this in this country. And we are sharing this, of course, just so that in terms of benchmarking and just understanding how other contexts are, it then is helpful in your other follow-up discussions. So the first, of course, is the Anti-Money Laundering Act, which was first established in 2013. And the objective really was to try and regulate issues of money laundering. It's, of course, a positive law, a progressive law, but as we will see later on in my presentation, there are a lot of unintended consequences, especially those that target the NPOs. And so we have to be mindful of the concerns that are emerging. The second law that we, of course, pay a lot of attention to are the anti-terrorism laws. And of course, these are related to TF or terrorism financing. It's important to also pay attention to that because NPOs are increasingly viewed as a risk as far as terrorism financing is concerned. And because of that narrative, whether true or false, there is an exposure. And as a result, it's easy for the regulators and the governments to use this law to target NPOs as well. The third, of course, is the Companies Act, which, of course, provides for the legal regime for the incorporation and the operations of companies. As you know, and most NPOs are companies limited by guarantee, non-profit companies. And so NPOs find themselves, of course, within this law. So in 2022, there was an amendment of the Companies Act here in Uganda, and the objective was to introduce and define who a beneficial owner is. That same law also provided for the establishment of the beneficial owners register at the Registry of Companies. Now, this amendment is extremely critical for us to pay attention to because The governments, of course, Uganda being inclusive and South Africa, the governments in these countries are under pressure from the FATF to make sure that they comply with these recommendations. So under recommendation 25, the countries are supposed to establish these beneficial owners provisions or requirements. And so it's not something that most of the governments are open to have discussions about, because there's a lot of international pressure within the financial system to make sure that the companies or the NPOs that are operating within the country are compliant with the laws and the recommendations as passed by the FATF. So who is a beneficial owner? And again, this is a definition that's provided for under Uganda's law, but also largely the definition, of course, that is also provided for by the FATF. So a beneficial owner essentially means a natural person. And again, of course, under company law, there's a difference between natural person and an artificial person. So it means a natural person who has final ownership or control of a company, or a natural person on whose behalf a transaction is conducted in a company, and includes a natural person who exercises ultimate control. So from this definition, we can see that the focus is on that person who has the final control or the final ownership. And by using that phrase, this beneficial ownership requirement tries to distinguish between a director of a company, of an NPO, the member of that NPO, and it tries to go beyond these two people or these two entities to try and establish if there is any other person or entity that is above the membership and above the board of directors or the board of trustees and is controlling the affairs of this company. So in other words, they want to identify if there are any other people who are above the directors or the members, and therefore are the ones who are making that final decision. Of course, in the context of NPOs, as we'll see later on, there is a contradiction, because when you look at our constitutive documents, usually what we call the memorandum and articles of association or the constitutions, they establish a board. Then sometimes they establish, of course, the annual general meeting or the membership. And those are the ones that exercise the powers. But here we have a new requirement from the FATF that is influencing the legislation within the country and is establishing this requirement for beneficial ownership. So next slide, please. And then we can then just kind of start looking a bit in detail, the overview of Uganda's law on beneficial ownership. That is what you see as BO. So the first overview or highlight is that the law requires the registry of companies to open and keep a record of beneficial owners information. Now that is we understand where that comes from, but it has some exposure, because if this record is kept, that means it can of course be accessed. The question then that would follow, who should be able to access that information? And we'll come back to that a bit later on in my presentation. The second highlight is that the registrar has a duty to verify the identity of beneficial owners. And this verification usually goes through the requirement for people or entities to submit the identification documents, their passports, their incorporation documents, and other information that can help to confirm the identity of the beneficial owner. So essentially, this legal regime seeks to make sure that they can identify a beneficial owner in full detail, such that in the event that they are needed tomorrow, it's easy to locate them. It has been argued, of course, that this requirement essentially does what we call lifting of the veil, which is a critical principle in company law, because if you come together and set up a company, people should be looking at the company. They should, if there's any complaint, they should be able to sue the company. If anyone offends the company should be able to sue in its names. But here we have a requirement that essentially intends to completely lift the veil and disclose the individuals who are behind these companies. The third point is that our law has a requirement for the register of companies to keep a register, and there's also a duty for companies, or rather NPOs, to file any updates in case of any changes on the particulars of the beneficial owners. And these changes must be filed within 14 days after the change, in default of which there is a daily fine of $132 for the company and every officer of that company. So if you have a company that has 5 directors and there's a change in beneficial owners, and that resolution or that record is not filed to update, after the 14 days, there will be a fine. And so the fine would be $132 times the 6 individuals and of course the company. So you see that these penalties can be very significant, especially considering that they are daily fines. So every day that goes in default, this penalty applies. So if, for example, if you attempt to file on the 15th day, there would be a penalty of 135. If you fail and if you get to the 16th day, then that's another 135 times the number of directors or officers that the company has. So that's problematic. And then any person can also apply to the registrar to inspect the particulars. So again, you see that members of the public are free to ask for any information about the records of a company. Now, this is problematic in the era of data protection, because anyone can go to search a company, get information, and publish it online on Twitter or other spaces. And this, of course, can have dire effects depending on the interests or the objective of that person who was trying to do whatever they were doing. And then finally, there's also an offense of giving false statements or false information on beneficial owners. So assuming you have a company, you have people who have ultimate control, and you deliberately decide to disclose or withhold information and give false information, if that is later on found out, there would be a fine of, again, $132 that would be imposed. So in brief, that is the overview of our legal framework on beneficial owners. And now I just want us to look a bit into the requirements and the procedure very briefly. So the procedure, first of all, is ideally not tedious, but because of a requirement for companies to do what we call data update on the online business registration system, the process has become very laborious and very complicated. And partly because very many companies or many organizations have not been filing information or updates about change of directors and membership. Some of the members have since passed away, others have moved on, and now there is a requirement to complete a data update process. So while these organizations are struggling to do this, they are unable to access, one, the signatures, of course, of the deceased persons. Two, they can't access the death certificates of the deceased persons, because these are people who are long gone. They have no contact with their surviving relatives. And three, it's just difficult sometimes to go back to someone and tell them, please help me with your passport or your national identity card for purposes of data update, when they actually moved on, let's say 5 or 10 years ago from the company, because then they may actually take legal action against you for having maintained them as directors or members. So I think that the critical point here is that it's important for NPOs to file updates on changes of their directors and membership immediately those changes occur, such that you're not then caught up in a web of complications. The second point is really the type of information that's collected. As you can see, they will need the nationality, date of birth, your physical address. They want to get your postal address. They want to see your email address. They want the phone number. They want the occupation of the beneficial owner and a lot of other personal data to that effect. And then the other thing that also is critical is that you need to disclose the nature of ownership or control. Is it by percentage of voting rights? Is it in terms of the right to appoint or remove a majority of the board? And what nature of influence, basically. So you're going to have to know that so that then you're able to state that clearly. And this is critical because in the event of a legal issue that involves the company, the authorities are likely to come for the individuals who will be on this beneficial owner form because they will be considered to be the ultimate controllers of the company and therefore the ones who must face the music. And so very many members of NPOs are having a difficult time accepting their data to be put on this beneficial owners form because while they're members, they only come for a meeting once in a year. They don't sit at the secretariat. They don't know what's happening on a daily basis. Some of them don't sign on the bank accounts. And so if you ask them to be beneficial owners, essentially suggesting that in the event of a problem, they're the ones who will be held responsible. Many of them are exercising caution and are reluctant to do that. And that is then exposing many organizations to a risk of filing false statements because then they put information which does not really tally with their articles or with what exactly is happening. So we can please move to the next slide. I see our time is fast spent. So in terms of the quick effects, highlights of the effects that beneficial owners requirement has on the NPO sector. The first, as I was saying, is NPOs, especially the umbrella network organizations, are experiencing challenges in terms of determining what their ownership ideally looks like. And again, as I said, when you look at the articles or the constitution, you find a state that the members shall sit at the apex body as the General Assembly. Essentially meaning that they're the ones who have the ultimate control of the organization. But yet, when you seek to put their information on the beneficial owners form, a number of them will exercise caution and ask, please don't put us there because we don't really know what's happening at the secretariat and we're not controlling the bank accounts. So then what do you do? So there's a bit of a complex situation there. The second point is the data update process, as I noted earlier, has caused a lot of delays. And because of these delays, very many bank accounts of NPOs are being frozen here in Kampala because of failure to file this beneficial owners form. The third point is the possibility of abuse of the search of the beneficial owners register with the deliberate effort to target NPO leaders, which will then escalate clampdown on civic space. So this is a problem that we imagine would arise in the near future. And so we're being very keen to watch how the register is accessed and how it is kept. And in the event that we experience any concerns, we'll be very quick, of course, to go to court to raise our concerns. In terms of the unintended consequences, and again, this is really Uganda's experience because we've been here for quite a while around these two laws. And so I just wanted to share with real examples. And these are things that have happened here. And so for our colleagues and partners in South Africa, I think that these are things to watch out for just so that you can either avoid them or in the event that they occur, you need to have put in place very strong mitigation measures. And that's why such sessions that focus on awareness raising are extremely important. So the first unintended consequence is the freezing or blocking of bank accounts. Over 10 NPOs in this country have had their accounts frozen directly on allegations of money laundering. I think the one that really stands out is the December 2020 order to freeze the bank accounts of the NGO Forum, which is a membership organization of over 650 NPOs, and also the freeze of accounts of the Uganda Women Network, abbreviated as ONET, which is a membership of over 20 women rights NPOs. So the bank accounts of these two organizations were frozen on allegations of money laundering and funding what they describe as subversive activities. And of course, when this freeze was done, it significantly affected the operations of these organizations. And as Chapter 4, we worked with partners to go to the High Court to challenge that freeze. And I'm happy to note that we were successful. The court ordered that the account should be unfrozen. And there's also something important that came in terms of jurisprudence from the court, because then the court also clarified on the powers of the regulators by stating that a regulator cannot freeze or order for the freeze of a bank account of an NPO on the basis of allegations. The court directed that there must be sufficient evidence that during the court hearing, if the court asks the regulator to provide that evidence of money laundering or subversive activities, the regulator should be in position to adduce that evidence to the court. In this case, when the court asked the regulator to provide evidence for the freeze of these bank accounts, they did not provide anything. They just said, we felt, we believed there was reasonable cause or basis, but they had no evidence whatsoever of money laundering activities. And so the court found that that order was ultra-vires and that it was inconsistent with the law and therefore unlawful. So I think that, again, that's an important court decision. I'm happy to share the PDF of that court decision and also a press statement that we issued in that regard, because then it helps to clarify and provide some safeguards in terms of how these powers can be used. And again, just to note again on freezing of bank accounts, hundreds of accounts of NPOs are currently being frozen or blocked for failure to update or file their beneficial owners form. So in other words, when this requirement for filing beneficial owners form starts really being enforced, there are always going to be consequences, partly because of the pressures from the FATF and other financial partners that the country works with. And I think just maybe in this regard also just to note that Uganda is also with you, South Africa, on the grey list. So we need to find a way to get away from that grey list so that we can encourage more business opportunities coming into our country. The second unintended consequence is the increased branding of human rights defenders as terrorists and agents of subversive activities. So when there is a freeze on bank accounts, the government usually holds a press briefing where they make all these false and wild allegations against NPOs. And of course, the public is watching and listening. So if the NPO leaders and the human rights defenders are branded as terrorists, even if we go to court and get a positive decision, there is still a negative impact on the image of the NPOs. So that is increasingly becoming a concern, especially considering the fact that the presumption of innocence in most of our countries is really low, because people don't appreciate the processes. Once you're labeled, the chapter is closed, people move on, they brand you, and that's who they know you are. The third point are the arbitrary arrests of NPO leaders on allegations of money laundering. I think the most recent one here is the arrest of the executive director of Chapter 4, Uganda, that's Mr. Nicholas Opio, who was arrested on allegations of money laundering for funds that were received on the accounts of Chapter 4 as a company, and for money that we had been receiving for over 5 years before he was arrested. So it was not that it was the first time that fund was being sent here, and it was being sent from a reputable US charity or foundation, but still you have the government using that opportunity to target the organization simply because they had an objective of making sure that they frustrate our work around election monitoring and also monitoring the killings and human rights violations around the 2021 elections. The fourth point are the challenges in managing bank accounts. And again, this is in relation to de-risking. I think Anne explained this point of de-risking very well. And so we need to pay attention. But if I may just say something very briefly on it, when an organization account is frozen, or if an organization is profiled, including the NPO leaders, if you're profiled as an individual, very many banks start looking at your account in a strange way. They'll require a lot of documentation. They will complicate your transactions on that bank account. If you attempt to open another bank account, you're likely to face a lot of hurdles in that process. And this is all as a result of this de-risking principle, which essentially means or suggests that banks are forced to take action to protect themselves by profiling HRDs and NPOs that are engaged in critical human rights work and accountability, by trying to avoid working with you or having bank accounts with you. So the concept of de-risking is a big concern. And again, I agree with Anne that the last thing we want is the banks being very afraid to work with NPOs, because if that happens, then it will be very risky and difficult for NPOs to move funds across borders for the work that they do. And then, of course, the issue of forced to redirect funds. And again, we have seen that a lot here. A quick example is again the freeze on the bank accounts that I've just talked about. We had to spend a lot of resources that were not planned for on litigation to try to lift the freeze of those bank accounts. But also after you have, while you're battling in court, the regulators across board will come up with a lot of demands on compliance issues. So you'll spend a lot of time and resources meeting compliance issues and fighting in court instead of doing the work that you originally set up to do. Then, of course, the reputational damage on NPOs and the sector. Then the chilling effect on freedom of association and NPO work. This, I think, is really in regard to the exposure that individuals feel they would have if they associate with NPOs. So we're seeing people being reluctant to participate in NPO work because of the exposure and risks of arrest, of course. Then I think finally is the violation of the right of access to resources. So once an organization is profiled or targeted, there are very many donors and partners that will look at you as an organization as a high-risk partner, and they will feel that you are non-compliant, and they will feel that giving you a grant or working with you may actually raise the risk on themselves. And so as a result, they will look for a way to end their relationship or partnership with you. And of course, resultant effect will be a violation of your right of access to resources to be able to do the work that you originally again set out to do. So I think in a nutshell, these are some of the experiences that we are encountering here in Uganda. And it's important that partners across the region and the continent pay attention to this so that we can stand together to push back on some of these developments as they continue to emerge. I think that should be it on my slides, I think. Thank you so much. I'll stay around for questions and I'll be happy to clarify where there is need.
Thank you, Anthony. I really appreciate that. It's yeah, I mean, I think it's a big worry. I think the unintended consequences of what you've just talked about is huge. But without delaying anything, so that we can get through the information we want to share, I'm going to hand over to Glenn.
Hi, Firiel. Good morning, colleagues, and thank you for the opportunity. I hope you can hear me. In the interest of time, I'm going to go as speedily as possible. So if we could move to the next slide, colleagues. Okay, so what have we seen happen thus far? As I think all of us are aware, a few years back, there was an attempt to amend the NPO Act. That's been in the pipeline for a long time. The key motivation offered by DSD was that the legislation needed to be amended as a consequence in order to facilitate certain what they termed administrative necessities or changes, which the department identified. I think the sector pushed back, and it foreshadowed the development of this NPO working group and a number of interventions which have subsequently happened. Now, as we know, that process was shelved. That is, the amendment of the NPO Act was shelved. Instead, what was enacted was the General Laws Amendment Act, which is in line with attempting to get South Africa compliant with the FATF recommendations as they pertain to the NPO sector. There is a broader national review that is happening across government and the financial sector and other actors to ensure compliance. But the GLAA has been passed, and we are now dealing with its impact. So this is going to continue to impact the sector. There is still other elements of the national sectoral review which are taking place, where the focus may shift now to the money laundering component of FATF. Simultaneously, we are also faced with a process, if we can call it that, which is supposed to be developing a social compact linked to the Presidential Social Sector Summit. So all of these things are happening concurrently. So if we could move to the next slide, what will happen next? Sorry, I don't know if it's Suzanne, but we can go. Keep going. Okay, so what we should expect going forward is that there will be a code of good practice for nonprofit giving, philanthropy, and donations. There is also the much anticipated NPO policy, which will certainly be placed before the sector and other stakeholders for consultation. There will be a complicated and potentially contentious area of compliance with the legislation as it now stands, that is the GLAA, and other instruments. At the same time that the processes around social compacting are happening. We can move. So I'm going to take these in order so that we can see how they interrelate. So just very, very briefly, I think this has been covered, right? But at the moment, what is necessitated by the GLAA is that NPOs must ensure that they have accurate and up-to-date information in respect of office bearers. They must make sure that any changes are registered with the NPO Directorate, and that the element of the ability of the public to access that information needs to be enhanced. There is already in the legislation provision for that. The administration of that via the NPO Directorate needs to be improved and enhanced. If we can go. Colleagues, so I'm just wanting to make sure that you can see here that for your office bearers, you need the full name, the ID, any court matters, etc., etc. So what does this mean for us as the NPO sector? This legislation is going to require us all to update, and we now need to manage, I think, as both Anthony and Anne has alluded to, the administrative burden on those of us who run our organizations is going to be increased, but so will the burden on those that serve on our boards and on our governance structures. Will people be willing to subject themselves to sharing all this information? How do we manage the protection of personal information vis-a-vis the ability of the state or the necessity of the state to hold this information? You can see this becomes complicated, and it may, as colleagues have already said, create an environment where people are unwilling to serve on governance structures. It will require much more information on the part of organizations as we go forward. We can move. So we can pass all of this. So I think you can read this here, but I just want to, so for example, these supposedly simple things now is that you must check that people don't have a criminal record. So you need a clearance certificate of some kind that says so-and-so does not have a criminal record, right? To do that, it's all of those things can only be done via a single division of SAPS in Pretoria. There's a cost attached to that. It takes months. These are not easy things for the state to administer, and they are going to be challenging for NPOs to remain on top of. We can go again. Next slide, please. So we can go. You can keep going. Okay, so because I've got a very few minutes left. So in respect of the state civil society partnership, in terms of government itself, it has been determined that the development of a state civil society partnership model must happen in terms of the medium-term strategic framework of the Department of Social Development, and that process has not occurred yet. If we can go to the next slide. So this is related, colleagues, so what is happening simultaneously to all of these processes now is that NPOs and government are going to have to find a better working model. It's been recognized that we need to do this. The framework does not exist. The way we are recording our contribution or the contribution of the sector as collected by Stats SA is state funding to nonprofit institutions, right? Entities. So there's a broad classification issue here that will also require further clarification. But it is an opportunity for the sector to be able to enter into a co-creation of a model for the delivery of services between the state and ourselves. So where we are projecting monies to be going from government to the sector, as you can see, that's continuing and it will continue, but the model on which it's based may change, okay? So if we can move from that, as I've said, the legislation or the act as it stands is the directorate, this is the NPO directorate, must create a model for persons and bodies giving or making donations. That process is now live and will be subject to public consultation. So on the one end, we have the state saying we need a new model to deliver services, and we want to have a bespoke model for civil society in relation to government. On the other side, government is saying we need to be able to promote giving and philanthropy in such a way that is transparent and consistent with the legislation and does not undermine or subvert our efforts to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. The next slide, lastly then, is, as you all know, the much anticipated NPO policy framework, which has been going on and on and on, is also now being revived. So generally speaking, the NPO Act has been amended. The requirement for a policy is generally accepted, and that process now requires input. So what are the broad principles to create an enabling environment for the nonprofit sector. However, this policy framework, as it is emerging, will potentially lead us back in 2 or 3 years to revision on legislation. So if I can go to the last, I think last slide. And much of the thinking seems to be centered on the following few points. That the NPO directorate as it exists needs to be reconfigured and created as a Schedule 2 or Schedule 3 body, okay? Essentially that it is independent. I've been told my time is up, but I'll just touch on these last few points, Fidel, if you will allow me. So,
go ahead.
Okay, so there will have to be some regulatory gazetted mechanism for moving the NPO directorate out of DSD and creating it elsewhere, right? The details of that are as yet unclear. But definitely there seems to be some growing consensus that the NPO directorate as it exists is not fit for purpose, and its location within the department, with a department with such a huge mandate, has not facilitated the meeting of the objects of the legislation, but similarly, its ability to regulate the sector, to ensure and promote compliance, has been seriously undermined through a range of factors, which we don't have to go into here now. But that certainly seems to be on the cards. Secondly, that the constant refrain from government that when it engages with civil society, it doesn't know who it's talking to. So there has been a review of NEDLAC, for example, which has made certain findings in respect of the community constituency there and its failings. Again, emerging thinking is that there needs to be a non-profit organizations advisory council which can fulfill some of those functions necessitated by the legislation, and particular to ensure if there's a partnership model with the state, that such a partnership model has an effective stakeholder forum for its delivery, that there is an accountable and transparent space where the state can deliver services in partnership with civil society. Lastly, and I think this one is going to perhaps cause some consternation, is that while we have a constitution that protects all our rights, and while we have a code of good practice for the NPO sector, in order for us to take the next step to future-proof the sector, that an NPO code of ethics will need to be gazetted so that we know what it is, if we translate these legal requirements into an ethical standard, we need to have a code. It needs to be codified so that everybody understands what the rules of the game are. And this is perhaps, I think, intended to ensure that we can speak to concerns around political and administrative manipulation on the part of the state, but it's also to ensure that the sector can self-regulate. So these are the developments as they stand, colleagues. I haven't spoken about the General Intelligence Amendment Bill, Law Amendment Bill, which I think is a separate topic entirely. But the overview that we have arrived at is that in order the consequences, the multiple consequences of complying with FATF will be with us for some time. The sector needs to put in place effective mechanisms to respond to these as opportunities, but also to safeguard what is in our best interest. The opportunities, I know, are challenging because of the general condition which the sector finds itself in. However, I think through events like this, we are promoting and attempting to promote awareness and information sharing, and hopefully that can result in greater collaboration amongst organizations and between organizations in civil society and government. Thank you, Firial.
Thank you, Glenn. Sorry. Okay. So thank you, Glenn.
Sorry,
I
Firial.
think,
Just present your
yes.
screen again. Just click present.
Okay. Sure. Hang on. Let me
Right.
just get there. Um, okay. So have you got the slide? Okay. Great. Thanks. Thank you. You know, there's nothing more for me to say after Glenn's little wrap up. So, I mean, there was a lot. There was a lot going on there for members of the South African sector. There is a lot going on. That's all I want to say at this point. So, I'm going to open up. I noted there was one or two questions posted in the chat. I'll allow Jocelyn an opportunity to pose those, and then we'll see who can comfortably respond to that. There may have been one or two comments as well. Jocelyn, do you mind reading them out?
Hi, Firio. Yes, I'll read. There were three questions, one of which Anne answered, but I'll read that as well. So from Laura Burke, I have an MPC with PBO certification. I am not registered as an MPO as we do not work with or apply for funds from government. How much of what is going to be asked of the MPO organizations will apply to MPCs, trusts, etc.? Anne responded by saying that MPCs and trusts will have to comply with beneficial ownership register and all the other FATF requirements for non-profits. Do you want me to go through all the questions?
Yes, please.
Okay. Laura
There's only
also then
three you
continued.
said, huh?
Okay. Laura also asked, what is the targeted date for this to be implemented? And then Adri Vermeulen asked, will vetting through PostNet be accepted? It is more expensive but quicker. So those are the three questions, Virial.
Thank you very much. I don't know that I can answer the last question about the PostNet issue. If any of the NPO members are able to respond, please will you help us with the two? Glenn, can you respond to the first question about the deadline? Glenn, are you on mute?
I'm not sure what the deadline is, but the legislation is live. The amendments are there. So it is as of now, or has been effective from when it was gazette, when it was passed, blah, blah, blah. So the GLAA then was in December 2022 and gazetted, promulgated, March 2023. So all of those changes exist as of now. In respect of the vetting issue, I'm not entirely sure what is meant by vetting, but if the question refers to the kind of police clearance thing, I don't know if PostNet is an option in that. But maybe the person asking the question could just elaborate on what they mean.
Okay, if the person is still on the call, would you like to just quickly elaborate? We've got a minute or so before we start with the next presentation.
And that's Adri.
Jocelyn, Adri, okay.
It doesn't look like
anything. Okay.
Now there's
All
one
right.
more.
Well,
She's not responding.
oh, sorry. Go ahead,
There's one more
Jocelyn.
question. Sorry, there's one more question from Colleen. I'm not quite sure if Glenn answered that. What about existing board members? Must they now obtain a police clearance? I'm not sure if Glenn actually answered that now.
Glenn?
Yes. So yes, the answer is yes. As I understand it, it is a requirement for existing. So not just new people, existing board members. And it does appear that you can do this via posting.
All right.
But I don't
Thank
know
you.
if that gets you there any faster. Let's hope.
Okay, Glenn. Well, thanks for clarifying that. Jocelyn, are we done? Have we
Those are
covered
the
everything?
questions. There were some comments, but I think in terms of the questions, we've addressed those that were posted on the chat.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. You can obviously keep posting while we move on to the next presentation. And the next presentation is coming from Jenny Wright. Jenny, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here and to share a little bit about the work that the NPO working group's done and why we are asking you to collaborate with us and why it's important. So the initial spark came on the 5th of October 2021, when actually most of us didn't even know the spark had happened. The Department of Social Development published a call for comment on the Nonprofit Amendment Bill, but there was minimal awareness. In fact, it was partway through the month before a small number of people started to be aware that it was there. So obviously this limited sector participation on a very important bill. So there was less than 30 days from the official time that it was given for the comment to be put. But what also made it difficult was that there was no explanatory memorandum released with the bill, which usually there is. And the draft explanatory memorandum was only released 4 days prior to the submission's closing date, 4 working days. So by the 25th of October 2021, with the closing date looming on the 31st of October, neither the amendment bill nor the draft memorandum had been published on the DSD or the NPO Directorate website, which really, for access to everybody, it should have been. There was also no NPO policy framework that this was all being based on. So moving on, thank you, Carol. So that was when the fire started, the NPO working group, and a lot of the work was lit. And that was when Enyatelo called a meeting like this, a sector-wide public meeting for NPOs. And that meeting on the 21st of October, there were 190 representatives from 170 NPOs. And we estimate that around 10,000 large and small NPOs from across South Africa were represented at that meeting. There were community-based organizations, there were voluntary associations, nonprofit companies, and nonprofit trusts. And we looked at the amendment bill and discussed the way forward, and that was when it was decided to elect the NPO working group to represent the attendees and to give a sector response. So the mandate for that was that the NPO working group would be a voice on legislation affecting the NPO sector, at that stage the NPO Act, and campaigning for adequate opportunities for public participation. And ultimately the thing that we all want is legislation supporting sector sustainability. And we worked up to achieving this through a lot of different avenues: public discussion, debates, webinars, articles and interviews in the media, partnerships with people to get media awareness going, lobbying on the public policy. We jumped and created actually opportunities for public participation. We shared whenever we could. There were regular communiques going out with the sector. We prepared submissions and submitted them. All of those sorts of things happened. Thank you, Periel. So I've put in a list of all the current NPO working group members, and it's been a very dedicated group that's been a privilege to work with. So I'm not going to go through who everybody is. There were some other members that were there in the beginning that don't have the capacity now, and we've thankfully had 2 new members joining us. But we worked very hard, and you can look at this afterwards. And then moving on, we've put the NPO working group timeline, which there isn't time to go through all this, and it doesn't even include everything we did. But if you look at this afterwards, you'll see that there are so many things that as we move through the timeline, thank you, Periel, that you can see all the different times that there were bills coming out, meetings we attended, all sorts of activities and consultations and things that happened. So you can see a lot went on. and it continues it just continues. There's going to be more coming all the time adding to this, because we're not at the end of the road yet, as we've heard from all the presenters this morning. So if we get back to what started this off, it was one bill, the NPO amendment bill, that we had to monitor, and there were definitely claims in there we needed to put out. Thank you, Periel. And we did that by using all sorts. You've gone a bit far, Periel. So at this stage, we were pushing for extension, which first they said no, and then we got the extension for submissions for the NPO amendment bill comments. We made a submission, and we encouraged and facilitated submissions by others. Thank you, Periel. However, then there were suddenly more bills appeared, and at this stage, the General Laws Amendment Bill was put out for comment again with late notice, limited time for submissions, and that was running in parallel with the NPO Amendment Bill process, and even some things in the two were clashing a bit. So it was a little bit confusing. NGO Law, one of the members of the NPO working group, dubbed the General Laws Amendment Bill the Octopus Bill, because it seemed to have tentacles that we needed to be looking at going everywhere. And actually, it was 5 different laws that were being affected by this. And as was mentioned earlier, this was because of FATF and the grey listing threat, and trying to push this through quickly in order to avert the grey listing, which unfortunately we didn't do. So suddenly the work had grown exponentially. Thank you. So again, it was just engaging, speaking up, communicating. We made submissions, we attended parliamentary committees, we sent out communiques to the sector that we were representing, and we had a website that we kept up to date to try and reach more people and get more people joining in and speaking up. And there was just so much more. But what was encouraging was to see that the work of the NPO working group was making a difference, and our input was being requested in the various forums. So our persistence paid off, and that's something we're going to go back to. Thank you. So we are asking that you also join in us in engaging and speaking up. And I know the question, if I'm sitting in something like this, is, well, why me? I'm too busy. It's just me. It's a small NPO. On that note, we are a tiny breast milk bank. You wouldn't think we'd be involved in something like this, but we are. And I feel like I'm making a difference, and it feels good. So I'm inviting you to join. It doesn't matter how small you are. You might be thinking, what do I have to say? What do I have to say it about? Join us. Come to the website, have a look, get informed. Thank you. Because why you? I say, who better? Your NGO will be affected by the legislative changes. You've heard that. You've heard what Anthony said, where so much is happening in Uganda. We don't want that happening here. So that means that we need to join hands and we need to build our sector. NGOs and NPOs know better than most that we are a resourceful group of people who don't shy away from challenges. We know there's power in teamwork and networking and supporting each other. We also know that no contribution is too small. It all builds up to make something big and make the impact big. And that's what we're asking, is that we all join hands to do that. We know as NPOs that being too busy doesn't stop us getting things done. We live with being under-resourced and with uncertainty in our sector. And we don't allow that to limit us. We go ahead and we make things possible. And so that's what we need to do here. And I think that we all also know that if we don't step up, it's not a given that somebody else will. So let's all step up. The other thing is that the people writing the amendments to the laws that are affecting NPOs and the parliamentary committees that are considering them and then it going to parliament, these are not all people that work in the NPO sector. They don't all understand it enough to be able to foresee some of the implications of what they're proposing. So we need input from the sector to avoid some of those unintended consequences that you heard about earlier, which might be well-meaning, it might be politically motivated. There are all sorts of reasons for it. Some of it is ignorance, and that's where we can speak up. And if it isn't ignorance, again, we need to speak up. And honestly, nobody cares about the well-being of the NPO sector, the sustainability of the sector, and the work that we do more than we do. And that makes us best placed to speak up. We want financial sustainability for the sector and our individual NPOs. We want good governance, and we need to build communication to get that. So thank you, Beryl. Just to remind you that there are things that are going to impact us. We heard all about that. So we can go on to what can we do? And again, it's getting involved. So now I would like to jump straight into it and say, we are asking you to step up. Is a call to action today. We're going to start now by having breakaway groups to answer some questions around this so that we can all work together. We would like to know, do you have a network that you can have? And it doesn't matter if your network is tiny. It's still a network that we can reach every NPO in every corner of South Africa to get the message to them. We are not asking you to give us your contacts. We're asking you to share. We're asking you to contact us. You can contact us via Inyatelo to tell us of other ways that we can collaborate. When you think of fantastic ideas later today, next week, next month, contact us. We need to work together to build a sustainable future for NPOs in South Africa. So that is the end of my plea to you to step forward and join us. And it's very important that we do. And we would love to hear all those people who say they're keen to collaborate, please do. And now we are going to break away into small groups, and there'll be an NPO member in those groups, and we're going to look at some of the questions. So we'll have 10 minutes for that, I think, Burial. And then we'll come back. And then obviously afterwards, we will be sharing this. So, you know, we will be able to use all that information.
Thanks very much, Jenny. I hear your plea for help and assistance, and this is actually a call for action where we know that we need to reach all the corners of South Africa, and we can't do it on our own. The NPO working group is a handful of members who've been around, as Jenny indicated earlier on. So the call to action is to join the dissemination of the information. So at this point, we're not yet working on increasing the size of the NPO working groups. It's really who can roll up their sleeves and help us, you know, sharing information. We will, of course, as Jenny said, there's a set of questions that we're now going to pose in a 8 to 10 minute breakaway. If you can join, we would be delighted. We will then each facilitate. So there's going to be a couple of sessions, and we're just going to break it up randomly. So hang on, you're going to be finding yourself like Scotty in the next. You know, we're going to zoom you into a breakaway room, and then we're going to zoom you out. And then we would like to ask one person to take notes and then just to share that with us at the plenary. There isn't going to be a lot of time, so we probably literally have minutes to be able to do that feedback session. Bayanda, over to you. Can you break us out, please? Okay, we're joining again.
Is everybody back in the room or what's happened? Where are we?
Hello, everybody. I think we're back. We had a lovely discussion in our group. Now, I'm fully aware that we're 4 minutes over the intended time, and quite a few people, even though they're still coming back. Okay, so people are still coming back. I'm not sure, that there is going to be a lot of time to provide the feedback. What we have is got notes of certainly in the session that Jenny and I were in the same session. So we've got some notes there, and other facilitators can also provide their notes, which we will then put together as some ideas, and we'll make sure that it's also shared in the feedback that you're all going to get post this session. And very happy to see that we still have quite a lot of people, interested people with us. So others, of course, have other meetings that they've scheduled. So I'm going to ask one or two presenters not presenters, facilitators, just if they want to give us one or two comments. So maybe we'll take the 3 questions and ask different group for different things, because I think it's inevitable we might overlap in terms of comments and ideas that has come through, if that's okay. Jenny, I'm going to leave it to you then. Jenny, are you okay to carry on, or shall I just continue?
Okay, you can continue, Beryl.
Are
You're
you
on a
okay,
roll.
Jenny?
Yes,
Sorry.
you're on a roll. Let's go.
Thank you. Okay, all right. So let me ask Shahima just to respond on the question of how can we increase awareness in the sector. Shahima was in my group, so we're going to ask her just to one or two things that were said about, or actually just one thing. How can we increase awareness in the sector that was discussed in our group? Can you please unmute and just give us a quick comment?
Sure. Hi there. Good afternoon, everybody. So there was a few things in our group. I think my biggest takeaway there was basically having a database of all NPOs, and perhaps using either social media or an SMS campaign, just to start with the awareness in the sector. Okay.
Thank you
Would you
very
like me
much.
to elaborate?
Yeah, Shahima, just so that we give the other groups a chance as well, because we're just mindful of their time. So that one is great. You wanted to elaborate on the point that you made? Go ahead.
Okay, no, what was just using so like I said, having a, a database.
Okay.
Everybody agreed that everyone's busy, so emails is not normally an effective communication tool.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Shahima. The next group, can I ask Suraya, Suzanne, and Glenn, whoever were part of a group, as sometimes we didn't know where we were going to find ourselves.
Furiel, I'm going to put my comments in the chat like Anne did.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you read it though? Because we do need to see it.
Sure.
Not all of us can see the chat.
I'm just going to do it quickly.
So
There
Jocelyn,
was
can you, while you're typing, can Jocelyn read Anne's, with Anne's there?
Okay. Can I go ahead?
Oh,
Yes,
but
please.
Okay.
who's talking now?
I think I am Jocelyn. So our group
Okay.
felt if we just provide guidance, I'll be quick, easy guidance that's easy to understand. So even guides, what is expected, what has changed. That was the feeling from our group. Also, there were some concerns around all these new expectations for board members, and the conversation then moved to the risk involved, obviously, and then probably more hesitant to volunteer to be directors or to be on boards. And then others felt that they were open to assist with disseminating the information, and we could just connect with them and they would then share it with their networks. That wouldn't be an issue.
Thank you. Did you cover Anne's comments?
No, that was just our comments for group 2.
Okay.
Group
All right.
3,
Yeah,
Jocelyn can do that.
yes.
Oh,
I
and
think,
Anne.
Suzanne, we're all on the same page here.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it was lovely because they were talking about the number of affiliates that they have in rural areas in 9 provinces. And that's the groupings that we need to reach out to, because they're always the last ones to hear about all these things. So they also in turn would use their social media platforms, their WhatsApp groups. But what they want us to do is to provide them with summaries and drip feed information as it goes, not necessarily a wordy newsletter, something that can be put in a very sharp, short message, and they will share it. The other thing was a big call for guidelines or particularly what must they do next? How must they cope with all these changes? And also that we need to do more lobbying and advocacy work. Because the sector, everyone agrees the sector's gone very quiet over the last couple of years, and we need to stop working in silos and become one strong voice. In other words, push back on things that we know aren't going to work for us and will diminish the sector. So I think more or less everybody is saying the same thing, but there's a willingness to share and get the word out.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Is there another facilitator who wishes to give comments? If it's different from what the others have already mentioned, kindly share with us. Anyone?
Group
I
4.
feel I'll ask, this is Jocelyn speaking. I'll ask Brenda to come in, and if she has anything that she feels that we still need to share from our group. I think there was 1 or 2 things. Brenda?
Thank you, John.
Well, thanks, Jocelyn. Yeah, ours was quite similar, but we stressed that it needed to be a specific and concise message to be distributed in multiple languages. And we, like the other group said, there's lots of convenient places that we just as a group could think of that we have access to distribute these available messages, whether it's donors or CBOs or clients. And yeah, so we thought once we knew what the message was, we could do that, definitely.
Brenda,
Thanks,
that's
Brenda.
Great idea. Love the multiple language. I mean, quite honestly, I haven't thought about it, and so it's fantastic that it's come up as a big. It's definitely something that we need to pay attention to. Justin, did you want to comment? I see you. No.
No,
Okay.
nothing more from me. Thank you.
Soraya, was there anyone in your group? Anything different?
Yeah, just from group 4, similar sentiments on practitioners and those on the ground really needing to know. So the WhatsApp channel that was talked about is perhaps more like a broadcasting channel. Those that participated received the information through Facebook and email. So there was quite a bit of discussion around finding those existing groups on Facebook that have, clusters of nonprofits on them, and collaborating with them to share the information. And then also a suggestion for even in-person seminars in various locations where people can meet face-to-face. And then also speaking about sponsoring those messages on Facebook and Twitter so that there's a real reach. And then the last thing was just the notion and wondering who knows about this, and holding the DSD and government accountable to making sure that there is an awareness campaign, and that guides are put out there, and these practitioners are aware, and also willingness to share. There was a question about what the existing website is, if that could be just pasted into the chat, because there is a lot of information there, which people would also like to forward on. Yeah, I
Thanks,
think that's
Soraya. Glenn, anything from your group?
Yes, I think Gail from our group will just share the feedback quickly.
Thank you, Gail.
It feels like we spoke about similar things, although we didn't necessarily get to answer all of the questions. I think something that somebody in our group said was that civil society is going to shrink due to legislation was a little bit scary because there's so much work to be done. And one of my comments was, how do we get to the little guys, the CBOs on the ground? And I like what's being suggested. There's something, the latest thinking around it is called small dose learning or micro learning. That's what we need to do. We need to share little nuggets of, it's like a prescription, but you take a pill every day. You don't take everything in one go. That we need to create some kind of a knowledge base that people can access, some kind of a platform where people can actually get all of that information. So I think our stuff was pretty similar, that we need to know where we can go and get information and who it is that can help us. And I think that all has to be in some central kind of repository.
Well, thank you very much for that, Gail. Extremely important, valuable information there. We will capture everything. Is there a facilitator that I've missed? Yes, no, going once, no. All right, I'm going to give the last word to Jenny. There was a comment on the group that Jenny and I were both on around capacity building, I think. Jenny, did you want to say something, last word, before we close out on this particular session?
Yes, I would. No, are you asking about what was happening in our group or just in general?
Up to you. Yeah.
Okay. So for one thing, the one comment that was in our group was that the place to start is internally in your own organization, so that you get your board aware and on board. Excuse the board repeats, but so that they're aware and everybody is on the same page, and they can also look at how to share outwardly. And then I'd also like to say that the NPO working group website has a lot of information. So you can go there and, the portal to find information at this point, I would suggest that is a very good place to start. And yes, it might be overwhelming, but you can dip in and read some as you get a chance. And don't be scared about it, because every time you learn something, next time it's a little bit less scary. So I came into this knowing nothing, and that's what I just want to share with you. I didn't know about parliamentary committees. I didn't know. I went into this group where I felt, my goodness, there were big groups like Inyatelo and, NGO law. There were lawyers on there, and there was me from a breast milk bank. And everybody was so warm, and we all connected. And that's what I'm feeling in this session today. So I would like it to continue, and that's what I think we can do, is that warm connection, and then use the fear that we are feeling of this uncertainty to actually drive involvement, and use the education that is available and the information that's available and the support that's available to deal with that fear, so that we can actually just go ahead and get stuff done, which is what NGOs do, don't we? We go ahead and we get things done. So that's what I'm.
Thank you, Jenny. And you muted yourself as you were saying your last few words.
Oh dear, never mind. Clearly not said enough. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jenny. That was a really good exercise. And I think we all agree it was a valuable exercise. At least we've heard the voices, the need is, the case is being made, I mean, even stronger. So really, really appreciate that. So what we are now going to do is to close out, unless there's any other comments from everyone, or anyone who wishes to make a final comment. Yes, there's some beautiful comments coming in the chat. We will capture all of that. And really, sometimes when one plans these things, there's so much that needs to be shared, because the sector is so big, and we know for a fact that everyone is not on par with what's going on, because they just don't have the time, do not get access to the resources. And so sometimes it feels like one overpopulates an agenda, but I don't know if we could do it any other way. So we've covered today and spoke about the anti-money laundering, FATF issues. Anthony came in and spoke about beneficial ownership and the example in Uganda, and he made a really, really good case about the importance of us really needing to understand the unintended consequences and the impact of it on our organizations and the work that we exist to do. And Glenn spoke about compliance, which was so important for us to know in the South African context, and really where you need to place your energy and attention. And on the group that I was in last, when Shahima said, it starts with the Exco, I need to make sure that they get it, they understand it. And so that was very important. And then, of course, this call to action, very important session, and just how we engage going forward. We will share the presentation. We will update and populate the NPO working group website. There is a lot of information. There's all the slides, and there's all the things that we've done over the last 2 years, as Jenny tried to paint that picture. But I want to just thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your interest. Because we can't do this if there's no interest, right? But we're all in this together, right? We're all in this together. So really want to thank you for your time. Thank you to the NPO working group members. They give and they give and they give, and they're so committed. The only thing that they're interested in is that the sector must continue to thrive. There's nothing monetary that drives any of the NPO working members, because we're not getting paid to do this. This is just all voluntary. So I just want to say to you, thank you. Okay. So Clara has a final question there. Can you read it? I just let me see if so we've closed, but let's answer Clara's question.
I can read it for you, Ferial.
Just go into the chat, please.
Hi, Ferial. Does the NPO working group have any affiliation with the Fiduciary Institute of South Africa, or FISA? They had a conference towards the end of last year, and one of the sessions focused on these new reporting obligations and the developments, as well as court cases in Europe, particularly looking at a ruling around having these BO registers made available to the public. They ruled that it was unconstitutional and in violation of privacy or POPIA.
Thank you for that. Clara, I'm going to ask Glenn or Anne to respond. Anne plays in global space. So Anne, do you have any knowledge of that?
Yes, she's quite right about it. And I think as well, Anthony mentioned it in his presentation about members of the public can pay a fee, and then they can have a look at all your directors or your trustees on that register. So it is a challenge, but it's not going to happen here in South Africa because it is unconstitutional. And the register apparently is only to be used between different government agencies. In other words, between the Financial Intelligence Center, between Treasury, between state security. You remember that cluster I talked about on the slide that none of us knew about has been established between those groupings. But the question that we need to ask ourselves, what happens if departments, government department heads, are now digging into that information and checking up on NPO members and their directors and their trustees? So yeah, maybe we need to talk to, was it FISA? FISA, as well as the Banking Association, because they also need to know the, you see, the thing is that the registry of beneficial owners links up with the securities registry. With the securities registry will have all the details about your investments and your stocks and shares and what have you. And this is why we as a sector have a problem, because as volunteer leaders, we don't want everybody to have a look at our linen, our dirty linen, our clean linen. We don't want that out there. And we're going to pull back. We're not going to serve on boards. We're going to pull back. This isn't just our problem in South Africa. It's a global thing that we're all saying all around the world for the sector. But yeah, thank you for telling us that about the FISA and what they brought up. That's great.
Thank you, Clara, for that. Thank you, Anne. Okay, so there's nothing else left to do but to say goodbye. Have a lovely rest of the day. It's 12:23, and thank you for allowing us to go over time. Goodbye.
Thank you, Ferial.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Margaret.
Thank you. Bye bye.